Well, I kinda wanted to cover Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 next, but there was a small part of me that thought it'd make more sense to get all of CI's AA lineup out of the way before getting to that big chungus, so Alien Rage it is. I find this game to be a bit of an interesting outlier in CI's catalog. Ever since their old shovelware days, the vast majority of their titles have been, and currently are, relatively grounded in their settings and gameplay, whether it's in their vain attempts to suck that barren Call of Duty or actually be good. As for Alien Rage, well, the name, cover, and if that's not enough, the marketing blurb tell all. It's a sci-fi FPS with a deliberate focus on fast-paced combat, all wrapped up in old-school shooter design principles. We'll address this later. Judging from its focus on scoring, intense action, and the fact that its encrypted INI files can only be decoded using a program originally meant for Bulletstorm, I can only assume that CI tried to cash in on that game's commercial failure. That or, God forbid, Aliens Colonial Marines. Unlike SGW2 and Enemy Front, games I've already covered, Alien Rage's development seems to be rather uneventful. Initially being announced as Alien Fear in April 2012, and swiftly being released in the fall in the following year without a single delay. But despite the relatively smooth sailing, I think you get the drill by now.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Before I discuss things that are actually important, I really need to get this tangent off my chest. I know I mocked Sniper Ghost Warrior's tacky-ass name, but Alien Rage? It sounds like a fake game in a sitcom. It's like if you called Doom Demon Rage, Blood Cultist Rage, or Quake 2 Strog Rage. Actually, I'd prefer that name. Whether it's keeping in line with old games or CI's penchant for lacking stories, Alien Mad's premise is as simple as can be. In the year 2233, humanity, or United Earth, finds an asteroid labeled Deimos 875, which is chock full of promethium, a ludicrously powerful energy source. So they mine it for a while, and then an alien race called the Vortis drops in, and they get along just fine until they don't. Thus, in a desperate attempt at scorched earth tactics, a fat burly space marine wearing 50 trucks worth of metal named Jack, yep, that's real sci-fi right there, is sent to the asteroid to level the facilities and prompt people like me to make an overused They Live reference with some of the words switched around for comedic effect. More or less your typical excuse plot. None of the main events are worth discussing, but considering the goal of the game, it does the job just fine. I do want to give some credit to the dialogue though. It can legitimately have a lot of charm and doesn't take itself too seriously all the time. Jack and his two companions, an AI chick named Iris and a pilot named Ray, aren't afraid of bantering and acting silly and crass at various points throughout the game, and it's fun to listen to.
Hell. Iris, where's my entrance?
I missed.
Wonderful. A computer that miscalculates.
Learn to shoot straight into the bull, then criticize my targeting.
Ladies, can we review the game plan here?
We use the element of surprise to sabotage as much of the refinery as we can, and get the hell out before the Vortis even know what hit them. No heroics.
Get in, poke around, pull out, no heroics. Sounds like your idea of a perfect date.
Very funny, Jack.
It's not anything super deep, but I thought they all had some good chemistry, and it gave me the impression that these guys have been through a lot together in the past. It adds a bit of character to an otherwise generic setting. Digging a little deeper though, there seems to have been an attempt to flesh out the minimal story and world through the use of audio logs that you can find scattered about throughout levels. And there's in fact so much I want to say that I'm pushing them back so this video isn't too front heavy. No joke. Seriously, how did Enemy Front give me nothing? Alien Irate is powered by the then ubiquitous Unreal Engine 3, and honestly, the game looks great. I'd argue that in terms of overall consistency and how it stacks up against some of its contemporaries, it's probably one of the most consistently good-looking games in CI's AA library. And I don't even think it lags that far behind some other games of its era, besides the really cheap-looking HUD. I'm sure someone's gonna nail me to a cross for saying that. Textures are fairly sharp, as soon as they load. The caverns and industrial areas are both full of detail with the rock formations and machinery, and there's some really nice moody atmosphere created by the good lighting, effects like blooms, smoke, and lens flares, and the bluish hue of the palette. It's mildly oppressive and feels cold, like space probably should. The skyboxes in the few moments where you can see the outside are simply beautiful too. As for the art style, while definitely leaning towards generic, it still kind of vibes with me. Explaining why I like it is like describing what water tastes like, but I just find stuff like the Vortis armor, weapons, and machinery with their somewhat intricate, angular, or sometimes somewhat smooth designs and light brights to be I don't know, aesthetic. In fact, the only flaw with the graphics that really sticks out to me is that this game has very little to no visual variety. I get that it all takes place in the same facility, but I reckon that even Dead Space's USG Ishimura, another gritty sci-fi setting that's coincidentally also for mining, has more going on compared to Alien Disgruntled samey looking corridors, caves, and catwalks. Every level blends together, and nothing stands out. Even if I like the art style, there's only so much of it in one game I can handle. As for a couple of technical issues, the smaller and fixable one is the way the camera has this annoying FOV increase when you sprint, which can get really janky when you slide. To remove this, simply download the stable camera mod, install the folders into the correct locations, and boom, fixed. The second problem I ran into was less frequent but a little more serious. While you might not be able to tell because I've capped my footage at 30 FPS, sorry, and I've disabled the FPS counter, I can assure you that if too much is happening at once, the game can chug slightly. My PC isn't top of the line, but it should be able to consistently handle a 2013 game running on UE3. It's not unplayable, but I certainly felt it, so word of warning, I guess. Moving on to gameplay, let's firstly get the elephant out of the room. Calling Alien Myth old school's like calling BioShock an immersive sim. There's bits and pieces of the DNA in there somewhere, but you know, little to none of the really important criteria. Full disclosure, I've only played the boomer shooters you see here once, and the only new one I've played is Dune 2016, so I'm not confident in calling myself an expert on the matter. But I can tell you right now that this isn't exactly New Blood before New Blood, it's charitably in the uncanny valley. I know it's not fair to compare this game with those beloved legendary classics, but one, it kinda opened itself to a firing squad in its marketing blurb, so I think my comparisons will be pretty justified and not that petty. And two, I think those boomer shooters set a more or less good precedent of what I consider good design, and more importantly, how to handle difficulty, which I'll get to eventually. Setting aside those criticisms for now, in theory, Alien Upset's gunplay is probably the best that CI have ever put out. Yeah, I know the bar has been set as low as my opinion of SGW1, but hear me out. Even on its own merits, there's some pretty decent quality carnage on display despite its utter simplicity, and it feels surprisingly smooth overall. While the gun sounds are lacking a fair bit, I'd say it's more than made up for by the sheer amount of feedback in other areas. As you've no doubt noticed from the footage, there's a fair amount going on with the guns themselves. Big muzzle flashes, plenty of smoke, sparks, heat waves, visible shots that leave fear-like tracers, and the barrels even glow red after sustained use. Animations aren't half bad either. They really pulled out all the stops here, so the simple act of firing these guns is a spectacle. So when you're shooting at something, it's even better. The Vorus are pinatas full of glow-in-the-dark blood that contrasts beautifully with the darker backdrop as you spill it by the gallons. The gore is adequate and impactful, with headshots blowing up heads and explosions and point-blank shotgun shots easily blowing off limbs and reducing an enemy into a pile of viscera. See, I pronounced it correctly this time, are you proud of me? The constant numbers, medals appearing on screen, and the cheesy Steve Bloom sound alike also add another layer of satisfaction to your slaughter.
Double kill.
It's almost weird to praise the gunplay to this extent, but like, it's pretty good. The only two issues that were noticeably noteworthy were that one, sometimes I can't fire my gun after I stop sprinting. The game seems a little bit picky about when it'll register your left click. And two, while you can reload and sprint, you have to start the process before running. Hitting R while you're already sprinting does nothing. While I didn't bother going for it that much, the melee also feels decent enough, with a weapon bud or slide able to send an enemy flying in a pinch. The slide's also fairly handy for moving around during combat. No, it's not Titanfall, although sometimes the slide will just yeet me way harder than it normally should, and it could be placebo, but the short burst of speed, I don't want to say it makes up for the lack of bunny hopping, the jump is fucking useless by the way, but it's something to work with. There's a total of 10 weapons you can find and use throughout the game. I suppose it's an adequate arsenal with weapons that are different enough to be worth glossing over individually, but unfortunately, contrary to its old school moniker, you can only carry 3 weapons, one of which is a pistol you can't drop. Each one also has an alt-fire fueled by these universal ammo box things that you can carry 5 of. Starting with the pistol you can't drop, it's honestly pretty okay for what's supposed to be a last resort infinite ammo backup weapon. It can kill basic mooks pretty easily with headshots within its effective range, but it's obviously less efficient than most other guns. The alt-fire shoots a really slow 3-round burst. Don't waste your charges on this. There's also a neat late game perk that makes it stupidly overpowered. The human-made assault rifle is a solid gun overall. Nice design, reliable damage output, good mag size, swift reloads, and a handy alt-fire that lobs grenades. The main drawback is that human weapons are pretty uncommon since you'll mostly find them on the odd dead marine, so you'll inevitably run out of ammo. Which means your next best option is the Vorus ion rifle. It functions the same, but it does feel a little weaker, less accurate, and less stable, but you'll basically never run out of ammo for it because it's so common, and it doesn't need to be reloaded, but it can overheat. The alt-fire is like the assault rifles, but the grenade travels in a straight line. The human shotgun is okay. The damage is up to par, but the pump feels utterly lethargic, and I frankly have no clue what the alt-fire does, nor can I find out, and ammo is rare. It's completely outclassed by the Vorus Blaster, or the alien shotgun. It's a pretty reliable one-shot kill, and if it doesn't, it'll send them ragdolling, never has to be reloaded, ammo is common, and it has one of the most useful alt-fires in the game. It fires this weird, gravity-defying orb that launches anyone in its path into the air, either stunning them or outright killing them. It doesn't really matter where it lands as far as I know. This is one of my favorite guns in the game, so you'll probably see it a lot in this video. The SMG is a fun gun that feels great to use, with its massive mag size and blistering rate of fire. Again though, human weapons are uncommon, especially this one, so when you're pissing this much ammo all over the place, you won't get to use it for long. The alt-fire sends out this EMP pulse that stuns enemies, but frankly, it's just a less impressive version of the Vorus Blaster's ragdollizer. The sniper rifle is a rare find, but when you get your hands on one, it's very effective, one-shotting every basic mook, and the alt-fire, an even more powerful explosive shot, is enough to instantly drop a heavy. If you could carry more weapons, I'd even consider this a mainstay. The minigun honestly isn't as exciting as you'd think. The damage output is good, but the biggest issue is that there's no way to preemptively spin it up, so you'll have to wait a bit before it actually fires, which also makes burst firing a sluggish annoyance. It's technically more time efficient to not let go of the trigger, but you'll waste ammo and overheat the gun. If you are gonna take notes from a boomer shooter, please don't take the bad parts of Quake 2. You can't sprint with it either, but the walking speed is serviceable enough, so it's fine, even if that's not old school. It's also temporary, so you'll have to drop it eventually. If nothing else, Jack lets loose a war cry when you hold the fire button, which is amazing and should be standard. Oh, and the alt-fire unleashes a really powerful plasma bomb. The Vorus plasma arc is found much later in the game, and it's an alright weapon. It's extremely accurate, making it really easy to get headshots at medium range. I've tried to use the alt-fire a few times, and like the human shotgun, I have no idea what it does. Last and certainly least is, unfortunately, the rocket launcher. Once a staple, reliable weapon of most boomer shooters, this pathetic pipe only carries 5 shots, is hard to find ammo for, the rockets hover in the air for a second before actually doing what they're supposed to do, you can't sprint with it, and switching to and from it is a tedious nightmare because you have to wait for these frivolous fucking flaps to open before you can fire or unequip it. Besides the alt-fire, which fires 3 rockets at once, being useful for the one moment you encounter a vehicle while you're on foot, the rocket launcher as a whole is outperformed by the assault and ion rifle's grenades, and it can just blow it out its ass. The Vorus variants you'll be using that arsenal against are on the more homogenous side of things than they should be, but regardless, it checks out fine, I suppose. The most common enemy you'll find are the warriors, these Jawa looking things. They behave exactly as you'd expect and are equipped with ion rifles or snipers on some occasions. They're also fond of shooting rockets. We'll get to that. Then there's the grunts, fast little guys that can turn invisible and rush towards you to use their shotguns or melee strikes and can stun you. They're pretty cool. After that, you have the grenadiers, big daddy looking guys that do exactly what their name would imply in life and death. We really do not need two mooks that shoot explosives. In my opinion, it'd be better if you cut the warrior's ability to do that completely so there's a better sense of target prioritization when you see one. Jetpack warriors are wasted potential since they behave almost exactly like warriors despite their ability to fly. Heavies are exactly what you'd expect, a big bullet sponge with a minigun that will shred you if you're not careful. Workers aren't really enemies and will cower on sight but are free points, so... They also may have a bomb strapped to their back because fuck workplace safety. Elites are late game enemies equipped with plasma arcs, and I'm not sure if they're underwhelming or live up to their name. On their own, they're not the most dangerous enemy. I think a warrior can kill you faster and go down without much more persuasion, but at the same time, their deadly accurate plasma arcs slow you down, making it really hard to get to cover and opening yourself to attack. There's also some almost one-off enemies in the form of spider bots, which explode on impact, and security drones and turrets, which are boring, spongy hit scanners. Like I've mentioned in passing, Alien Ticked has this scoring system that it's built around, and it works exactly as you'd think it does. Stronger enemies lead to more points per kill, with bonuses for chain kills, headshots, melee, etc. You can also find these weird pyramid things in audio logs for bonus points, making it the first time I've been able to seamlessly mention secrets in a video because they actually fucking do something. Incredibly basic and bare bones stuff, and while I haven't actually played it, there's no room for super creative kills like the ones you can get in Bulletstorm. The points fuel the blandest and most unfulfilling perk system I've ever seen. Overall, it's drip fed to you, and the rewards generally don't make up for it. There's a total of 12 perks divided into 4 tiers that are unlocked after you reach a certain score threshold, which actually seems to track the points you've earned across all attempts, not just your final score. 4 million for the first tier, 20 million for the second, then 30 million, then 40 million. As the numbers demonstrate, it feels like it takes a long time to unlock new tiers. While I unlocked the first tier during Mission 2, it wasn't until Mission 7 or when I was halfway through the game to get to the second. To make the drip feeding worse, you have limited perk slots, with one being unlocked with each of the first 3 tiers. So when you're, again, halfway through the game, you'll have 6 perks on hand, but you can only use 2 at a time. And these perks aren't even that interesting or useful, so this limitation is totally pointless. Up to this point, you'll only have a stun resistance perk that helps against one enemy type, perks that either increase your mag size or reserve ammo in a game where both are already plentiful, and barely noticeable 10% increases to either projectile or energy weapon damage or rate of fire. It wasn't until Mission 9 where I finally unlocked perks that gave me more health, faster regen, and explosive resistance, but this still falls under practical but boring and feels like how the game should have been from the get-go. And again, because you'll pretty much have to use all 3 of these perks, you won't be able to use anything from the previous tier, so they'll feel like even more of a waste of time. The last tier, which I unlocked during Mission 13, is almost a slap in the face. You get damage resistance from energy weapons, but you won't have space for it, and the explosive resistance is more important in my opinion. Faster cooldowns with miniguns and mechs, even though both appear infrequently, the latter only once, with the only truly worthwhile and cool thing being the aforementioned mega pistol. I'm glad the points have a purpose, but there's so many better ways the perks could have been handled. Make them stronger, make it a skill point based system, directly purchase them with the points, add perks that can change the way you approach a game, or hell, at least allow me to use more than 3 of these boring perks. At least you can New Game Plus. Regardless, the gunplay's pretty good until you remember enemies shoot back. Alien Unhappy's difficulty is gonna need some heavy analysis. For some perspective, I've played most of the boomer shooters on the harder end of their difficulty scales, and this is still more difficult than any of them. And I'm playing on what's essentially the normal difficulty labeled as hard. I would have played on easy, pretentiously called challenging, but if Civvy had to play Blood 2 on at least normal, I gotta play it right. And considering my time with this playthrough, I don't even want to bother with brutal. In my opinion, the classics can get kinda ball busting at times, but I still found them to be fair enough, and most of my deaths felt like they were caused by poor judgment on my part. On the flip side, this game is hard due to a combination of bad or, dare I say it, unfair design choices that I'll get into. You know, it's as if the aliens make you rage. And no, this is not meant to be a case of old good, new bad, not entirely anyway. It's about looking at what this game does wrong, and instead of slapping on a vague statement of artificial difficulty, I'll look at old tried and true formulas to try to show how this game could have improved its balancing. Hell, I'll even throw in a bit of Titanfall 2 for good measure. The bullshit difficulty stems from a combination of how the game handles your health, the enemies, and the terrible level design, which all mix like bleach and ammonia. So firstly, the enemies are generally hit scanners, which means that you can't avoid damage if you're out in the open. Now, there's a plethora of different ways to have enemies like this, but still make run and gun viable. You can make them only a small part of the enemy roster, so you're not always fighting them. You can have clearly defined moments where they don't shoot, allowing the player to push forward. You can make the player harder to hit as long as they crouch or stay on the move. Add a way to heal on the fly with portable medkits, turn enemies into medkits, or add generous regenerating health. If that's too hard, just give them enough health and armor to tank whatever comes their way. Alien fucking Piss doesn't do any of this, opting to make you as brittle as a Pringle on, again, the normal difficulty and forcing you to wait a painfully long time before you fully heal, which will still leave you a sitting duck to the aggressive AI that will absolutely hunt you down. Old school. Enemies do also fire projectiles, but holy shit, that's actually worse. The thing with projectiles is that it's normally a great way to promote run and gun play. Take Doom for example. Most enemies fire them so you can dodge them, which allows you to stay in the fray and fight like hell as long as you pay attention and keep moving. That, or it balances out attacks that would otherwise make a huge dent in you, like the dynamite that cultists throw in blood. In addition, enemies will also telegraph these attacks, so you'll be able to learn the correct timing to move out of the way. Here, enemies will launch their grenades with no warning and will more than likely annihilate what little health you have, and trust me, they will do this obnoxiously often. You're simply not fast nor agile enough to avoid them if they're fired at anything shorter than long range, and even if the projectile doesn't hit you directly, the massive blast radius and splash damage will surely do you in, or at least distort the hell out of your vision so you can't see anything. So even if the enemy misses, or you technically avoid the attack, you'll still be punished. Even if you try to take a more cautious approach and take shots from cover, it's still liable to screw it up. In a lot of areas, there's simply not enough of it, and if it is present, sometimes they easily fall to bits so enemies can shoot right through or are too small to fully accommodate Jack's fat ass. But worst of all, they cannot protect you from explosives! The blast damage can go right through and kill you. Old school should not mean taking inspiration from Blood 2. Also, get the fuck out if you're gonna try to slap me with a realism argument. These grapes are made worse by the terrible level design. It's kind of the reason why I nearly didn't bother to cover this game. As you may have already seen, Alien Angry is almost absurdly linear all throughout, with a waypoint guiding you by the nose through copious amounts of corridor shooting for some aggressively egregious pleb tier map and encounter design with barely anything unique to point out. It's a far cry from the large and intricate maps and arenas that were good fun to explore in boomer shooters. I know I've gone on record to say that corridors will get a barely passing C grade from me as long as the combat's enjoyable enough to make me forget it in the moment, and I still stand by that. And again, while it still can be fun in certain sections, either due to luck on my part or a half-decent arena, I feel like this confined level design can create difficulty spikes that feel cheap, lazy, and irritating. A lot of the areas that I've had to try over and over were typically these perfectly straight linear paths with basically no room to maneuver, alternate ways to approach it, and or not enough effective cover. And good lord, fuck the ones with a minigun at the end. Anyway, these particular areas made me realize something that could very well be applied to the game's difficulty as a whole. The difficulty is unfair because everything from the awful layouts, limited weapons, and poorly tuned health and enemies create scenarios that that don't really allow for any level or variety of problem solving or strategies to get past a certain area. There's honestly too many examples to list from better games, but if there's a certain part giving you trouble, you could do stuff like grab more health, armor, ammo, or power-ups either before or during a fight requiring memorization and good timing, try using a different weapon to tackle the situation, try changing the way you deal with the encounter either by prioritizing different targets or taking a slightly different path in the arena, etc. It's a combat sandbox with plenty of options. Even if the level kicks my ass, I'll feel like I've learned a little bit more about the encounter, and when I beat it, I'll feel like I actually used my knowledge and skill and I remember it fondly. As for Alien in a shit mood, it usually feels like it boils down to keep throwing yourself at the problem and hopefully you'll get lucky this time, especially in the areas with worse level design. I literally do not have the room nor tools nor ability to approach these differently, aside from like a handful of areas where I'm like, oh, I should kill those 2 snipers first, or oh, there's a heavy there, better be careful. It's as mindless as it gets and has no depth. Instead of making all kinds of tactical decisions at a mile a minute, my brain shuts itself off after a dozen or so tries and I'm solely running on autopilot and hope or lack thereof. I rarely ever feel like I have the slightest bit of control over whether or not I survive. Sometimes I die instantly, and other times I cheat death. And even after all of this, I'd still take it over SGW1. And no, bottlenecking enemies is a boring band-aid solution and fails to actually fix the issues at hand. And it's worth restating that, even setting these issues aside, the level design is as unimaginative as it can possibly get. Well, almost. Even if I happen to get horribly lost or otherwise annoyed with some levels in classic shooters, I could still give shit like, Barrels of Fun a bit of credit for being interesting at the very least. There's nothing I can really say about a series of cramped hallways. Even if the gunplay is enjoyable at the core, it's not interesting enough on its own to even come close to masking the blandness. Very rarely you'll get a slightly more interestingly laid out battlefield like this cargo bay looking area in Mission 13. There's a ton of enemies, but there's just enough cover to break line of sight, flank them, and heal if you need to. It's still very basic, but compared to everything else, it's like playing Fear, and provides a glimpse of what it'd be like if the level design was a bit less shit. The only other noteworthy things are this awful, literally on rails level, and a mech suit level that surprisingly doesn't totally suck, but it still feels like it's been shoehorned in. And what would an old school shooter be without boss fights? A lot better, usually. I've mentioned this before, but I rarely ever find boss fights to be very fun, even in the classics. Either it's a total anticlimax or it's annoyingly difficult and tedious, so please excuse anything that may seem like bias. But generally, these tend to appear at the end of episodes, so about 8 levels on average, or at the very end, so it's easily outweighed. As for Alien Salty, you'll be delighted to learn that there's 8 of the fucking things out of the 14 missions, 4 of which are back-to-back, and none of them are really that fun to fight, whether it's due to their very nature of being bullet sponges, or in some cases being straight up unfair. The first boss, the Vorus Centurion, appears as early as Mission 2, and it's so bad that I actually quit and uninstalled the game the first time I played it, and it's still just as horrible as I remember. I have a folder with nearly every attempt. You want to know how many tries this took me? More than 20 tries! He's a hit scanner, making it nearly impossible to avoid taking damage while out in the open. The only cover in this poorly designed arena that won't fall apart are these thin pillars that still have explosives strapped to them for no discernible reason, and this weird fire attack he unleashes at lower health phases right through it anyway, and at this point in the game, your health regenerates so slowly that death will be borderline inevitable. Making things even worse, some warriors will be periodically sent in as if I needed more nigh unavoidable hit scanners and rockets being shot at me. Like the difficulty in general, there's barely a fucking lick of strategy to this fight. What I described was the cheese strat, and even then it can still get mercilessly shot down. Being mobile doesn't work, taking pot shots barely works. No skill, just pure unadulterated insanity. I would rather fight the Mother Demon in Doom 64 without the Unmaker. And I fucking did! Words cannot describe how much the Cunturian can just fuck off! Thankfully, the bosses don't get this bad for a while, but they're still boring, tedious speed bumps. The next one, the Vorus Gladiator, is in Mission 6. Comparatively, his lasers are much easier to avoid and there's a lot of space to move around and opportunities to stun him with the environment, but he still outstays his welcome. The next level has the Mark 12 Heavy Mech. The attacks are pretty easy to avoid as long as you keep running until he spams explosives willy-nilly at one point, then you just pray. By the way, you can also get one shot if you're unlucky. While the open space actually allows you to dodge incoming rockets, the lack of cover leaves you vulnerable to hit scanners, so that's where the luck kinda comes in. Really, another tedious 5-minute ordeal. The next level, again, has another boss, the AA-19 Combat Mech. This one's actually quite easy, or knowing this game, I may have just gotten lucky, especially since he froze in place at one point. The attacks are extremely easy to avoid and the cover, while it raises and lowers at random, actually works. However, while the boss looks like it has less health than the others, it periodically heals and I'm not sure you can even stop the process, leading to a fight that took more than 6 minutes. Honestly, I'd say the real threat are these annoying, spongy drones that slow you down when they inevitably hit you. I didn't die once, but I'm not sure if that means it was good. And because we all just love boss fights, there's another one in Mission 9, the GX-7 Destroyer prototype. 4 in a row! Thankfully, this one's super easy once you figure out what to do and avoid the nigh unavoidable attacks. Shoot the shoulders, shoot the chest, dead in 30 seconds. 2 missions later, we meet Vorus Primus, and he's really easy as well. He's basically melee only, so just keep running around and pepper him for 3 minutes and maybe drop some barrels on him. The penultimate boss, the DF-9 Sentry Mech, appears in Mission 13. The first phase has him leaping from platform to platform with explosives on them to damage him. Periodically, he'll hit you with an unavoidable ground pound, although there's nothing else to damage you, so it balances out, where you can wail on the weak point on his back. The second phase has it fighting you on the ground proper with rockets and spinny lasers that can be avoided by running around and taking cover at the right times. The weak point gets moved to its front, so if you manage to take a minigun with you from the last section, you can breeze past this part in no time flat. The third phase is identical, but the weak point is back on its back, so you'll have to wait for it to do the spinning attack, which is boring. Well, it's still a tedious affair, but there's somewhat of a strategy and rhythm to it, I guess. And now, the final boss, the Vorus God Mech, is almost as bad as the Conturion. While it's the only boss that has mid-fight checkpoints because it runs away after certain thresholds, the fight's still a load of bullshit. Yeah, I know I could have used the Mega Pistol at this point, but I had to see what it's like without such a massive cheat. I suffer for your boredom. The phases often take place in pathetically tiny areas with barely any cover and frequently spawning enemies, with one half being no man's land since the God Mech is right there. And when it decides to climb on the ceiling, pray! Did I mention it also has bullshit rockets that will carpet bomb your sorry ass? I get that it's the last fight, but it's still tedious and frustrating, and it's a spider and fuck spiders. Anyway, we all know that my 2,500 word critique will immediately implode when someone says get good, so sorry for wasting your time. Going back to a more, oddly, positive note, the audio logs do a surprisingly decent job at expanding Alien Negative Affect's simple story. I didn't bother to try to hunt them all down, but thankfully I did find a full compilation of every single one on YouTube. They follow the tale of a scientist by the name of Karen Matheson, primarily detailing the events that led to the Vorus attacking humanity. Much to my surprise, the lore is actually way more nuanced than I would have ever expected for a game like this. I'm not gonna make some kind of dumb, hyperbolic statement on the level of calling this game old school, but like, I think there was at least a modicum of thought put into it, more than the game itself anyway. Think about the backstories of actual old school shooters. Why are the demons killing everyone? Because demons are dicks. Why are the aliens stealing our chicks? Because aliens are assholes. Why are the cultists serving Chernobog? Because cultists are cunts. Why are the Vorus turning against humanity? Because humanity committed a horrible taboo against Vorus culture by developing weapons with Prometheum, which is some of the aliens have built a religion around it to pretty much destroying their whole home planet over it because of their sheer dependence on it, thus betraying their alliance. Nope, I am not exaggerating. This relatively low-budget title that supposedly takes inspiration from those old games with Carmackian stories also took notes from the Sepoy Mutiny, creating a narrative that practically spits in the face of the pure black and white morality shtick we normally see. Depending on your personal stance on these types of things, you could see either side as being in a morally gray area, or hell, the Vorus could even be seen as the victims if you're so inclined. Not only that, Kataka, a Vorus scientist that Dr. Matheson befriends, serves as a way to develop the Vorus in their culture and paint them in a surprisingly good and civil light.
And then we talked.
Apparently, Vor's society is strictly dual in nature. Men safeguard the species and women develop it. No patriarchy or anything, everyone is in the same boat. But why is it so important that we don't use their tech for any kind of weaponry? It is religion. It is taboo, she said. Fine by me. Now I know a little bit more. It wasn't easy for her to say to an outsider, but Katka took my hands and told the story of her homeworld. The Vors rely almost completely on promethium as an energy resource. It was first encountered on their planet almost a century ago. Didn't take long before fights broke out for complete control. The Vor society was always very much military in nature, and they only see two options to any conflict: total victory or complete defeat. Years later, a world emerged in utter ruin, but the Vors learned their lesson. They centered their religion on promethium. As they understood it, brushing against total annihilation meant the element wanted something more for them. Some story, right?
There's also, surprisingly, no instances of the writers trying too hard to convince you that they're supposed to be bad. Beyond the premise, there's nothing written or shown to make them look extra evil. On the opposite end, humans aren't portrayed as being in the right either, with Matheson showing resentment towards the UE commanders and guilt over what her species has done.
Since Katka opened up to me, I can't help feeling resentment towards Peyton and the likes of him in UE Command, and to myself for hiding the truth from her. We've already managed to modify a few of our infantry weapons like the EL-05 minigun to focus and shoot impact particles of NX-01 the size of a fist. The process the Vors have given us can easily be adapted to refine raw promethium in the gun's barrel. That's only the proof of concept phase. Wait till we get a hold of the bigger arsenal. Somewhere deep inside, I already know we'll end up just like them. Is this karma, or am I just that sleepy? Oh, God, this is just great. I've fallen asleep in the weapons research laboratory and Katka found me. When I woke up, she just stood there looking at me, disappointed, angry. Before I understood what had happened, she stormed the place and started tearing everything apart. It took me a while to calm her down into non-alert security, but still rattled, she yelled at me, saying if her people found out, I would be executed on the spot. And then she took off. I feel like a traitor. She's not even the same species.
Obviously, it's rushed in that it only seemed to take one act of appropriation to spark a war, but the fact that there was an actual attempt, and a fairly successful one in my opinion, to humanize the Vorus and make them rather sympathetic in a game that absolutely did not have an obligation to do so is super commendable in my opinion, even if it's just side content. You hear that, Infinite Warfare? Alien's synonym for mad or rage is something that I genuinely want to like. It looks great, the gunplay is simple, but solid and silky smooth, and the tone is charmingly B-movie-esque. But those brief moments of fun do not change the fact that the level design rivals SGW2, which still sucks by the way, in terms of being bare bones, nor can it make me overlook how poorly tuned the difficulty is. You're too brittle for most of the game to make run and gun consistently reliable, but the game can't even get more cautious played right either, with a serious lack of effective cover and bullshit enemy explosives. It really feels like CI didn't know what kind of game they wanted to design. Even the new Colossus is easier. And with such limited options in every respect, every challenge devolves into a monotonous slog of insanity. Not only that, the high points really aren't anything special in and of themselves and feel extremely derivative, even if it, again, looks great. The best parts of my guilty pleasures feel like they have some modicum of identity that none of their more popular brethren can quite offer. While the rushes from Alien game with a shit name mostly feel like a distilled version of other run and gun games with more depth and imagination without any of the same irritating pitfalls of CI's offering. Look, I don't hate this game, not at all. It's not SGW1, and it's still more fun and interesting than SGW2. I consider parts of it to be guilty pleasures. But even I personally see little to no reason to play this game in the current year unless you're an idiot making a long-winded video that nobody's gonna watch. In 2013, it was already unfavorably compared to the classics, and it's only aged worse with the boomer shooter renaissance that still continues to grow to this day. Even if you're not interested in games of that particular style, there's plenty of more engaging and competent modern run-and-gun games. CI hasn't bothered to try anything like this since, so I can't even call it a stepping stone. I don't know how to end this video, so if you'll excuse me. Yup, Quake was a good game.